Hello! Welcome to our introductory podcast regarding the escalation of anti-Asian brutality due to the indirect and direct employment of anti-Asian sentiment. We are determined to expose and elaborate upon the historical context of this conflict in order to observe how its origins have amplified its damage in our contemporary circumstances. I am Laurel Valdez, the main researcher.
I am Arvelyn Ticano, the social media lead.
I am Jemima Pelayo, the main design lead.
I am Raquino, project lead, and we are Asians with Reasons. Let's begin. The Asian American and Pacific Islander community have endured numerous accounts of institutional and explicit acts of racial prejudice. If these detrimental hostilities towards a community are not actively condemned and dismantled at the institutional level, anti-Asian cruelty will prevail and the protection of the community will be threatened.
In light of the current pandemic, anti-Asian rhetoric utilized by Donald Trump has sparked a significant increase in anti-Asian violence. With name-calling such as Kung Flu or China virus, Donald Trump has irresponsibly used his powerful platform to disseminate false and blatantly racist information. His ignorance has perpetuated the anti-Asian stereotypes to the point of forever taking away their livelihoods, economic success, material wealth, and most importantly, their lives.
To our dismay, the anti-Asian rhetoric distributed by the Trump administration does not exist as the initial instance of anti-Asian sentiment within the functions of the American society and its institutions. Anti-Asian stigma has compelled a surplus of insecurities, fears, and anxieties upon the cohesive Asian culture, and its presence has been rampant throughout the history of the United States.
The 1854 California Supreme Court case of People v. Hall abolished the rights of Chinese Americans to testify in opposition to their white counterparts. This period is distinguished as the birthplace of the overly exerted Asian immigrants are here to steal our work and our opportunities to advance in the economy trope, as approximately 200 years later, the phrase continues to be prevalent in our modern discourse and debate.
Preconceived notions of Asian immorality and filth were heavily reinforced as the rhetoric assisted in the establishment of the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act that prohibited the eligibility of current and incoming Chinese immigrants from obtaining American citizenship. Politicians at the time attempted to justify this enactment as a method to secure racial purity, which implies that the Asian demographic ought to be confined into one place. Sound familiar?
Already, are we able to locate modern-day parallels from pivotal events that occurred centuries ago? The Open Door Policy of 1900 was an attempt to foster and solidify international trade relationships with the continent of Asia. Despite the exercise of anti-Asian rhetoric and executions, the hypocrisy of the United States was detected due to their deliverance of troops to disarm and suppress Chinese nationalists.
The Buntok Igorot exhibition of 1905 is an additional example that amplifies the hypocrisy instilled within the foundation and the overall operations of our country, as white businessmen incarcerated several Igorot individuals as a means to display their savagery and inability to self-govern, indicating that the United States is obligated to intrude and aid in civilizing their ill behaviors.
From experiencing forced relocations to being displaced to the white man, the assumption that all Asians have made it by being successful is inherently false and undermines the existence of racism and inequities that still persist across the BIPOC community. The model minority myth has allowed white America to avoid any kind of responsibility in addressing racism, but it has also invalidated the concerns among the AAPI community by placing the false narrative that Asians are all inherently successful and problem-free.
The country is barely beginning to accept and confront anti-Asian sentiment, especially in levels like the Supreme Court. Thankfully, anti-Asian hate crimes and violences are being reported and taking notice on numerous levels.
Currently, the U.S. Congress and both the U.S. and California legislative branch are in the initial stages of devising, passing, and revising bills that truly represent and condemn the anti-Asian sentiment in order to bring justice.
Notably, Biden urges U.S. Congress to swiftly pass a legislation known as the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which aims to increase the overall oversight of hate crimes in relation to COVID-19 by the Department of Justice.
With the Asian Pacific American Caucus, in order to shed light on both the concerns and needs of the AAPI community, they ensured that there is such representation in the U.S. legislation. Because of that, it can contribute in protecting not only their civil liberties, but to combat the rise of anti-Asian hate crimes as well.
On the other hand, within our legislative branch in California AR 23 has been recently introduced with its purpose to denounce acts of violence, racism, and hate toward the AAPI community. Its impact has not been expanded upon yet, but I'm hopeful that it will bring forth positive impacts to our society.
Thanks, Lola, for bringing that up. Alongside that bill, there is a California SB 87, which is regarding grants for small businesses, more so Asian-owned, typically located in Chinatowns. Due to the xenophobia amid the pandemic, they suffered being targeted and attacked. It is relevant because it can serve as an immense aid as they reap from the grants.
Nonetheless, Joe Biden sets forth in the right direction, showing that efforts from both him and his administration to bring forth awareness and protection to the AAPI community.
More specifically, on January 26, 2021, Biden released a memorandum in which condemns and combats racism, xenophobia, and intolerance against the AAPI community in the United States. This displays that the exponential increase of hate and violence are acknowledged as a pressing matter and needs to be addressed.
Less than a month later, Biden releases a video about Lunar New Year's, yet he took this as an opportunity to mention the ongoing racist and harassment tragedies. He continuously seeks for unity in the country, alongside dignity and respect.
Not only has the president taken action, but the U.S. Department of Justice as well. They provide services to report violence and hate crimes in the AAPI communities. In fact, there is the Elder Justice Initiative, which supports and coordinates efforts to combat elder abuse, as they were recently targeted on numerous accounts. Now, let's take a look at our own state, the California Executive Branch, and its activities regarding these issues.
The Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, also known as GoBiz, offers assistance to help small businesses. This serves as an immense help to the victims and their businesses as they were targeted and attacked. Now, on to the CA Governor, Gavin Newsom, where he signed AB 85, and this is also known as the Budget Act of 2020. It is a plan that strengthens emergency response, protects public health and safety, and promotes economic recovery. More specifically, $1.4 million was dedicated to research at UCLA and the Stop AAPI Hate website. This allows more attention, support, and awareness overall. Yet, that was accounted for in 2020. Now what?
Thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate it. In fact, recently on Friday, March 19th, 2021, Governor Newsom held a press conference in San Francisco addressing his concerns and his commitments. Not only does he feel like such occurrences are painful and infuriating, but remarked, "What the hell is wrong with us?"
You know, that same statement can apply to the judicial branch because what the hell? As we proceed towards the judicial branch portion of this podcast, it is visible that in order to efficiently administer change, hell must be raised on our ends. Jem, let's examine the 1993 Supreme Court case, Wisconsin versus Mitchell.
Todd Mitchell was convicted of a 2-year sentence on the account of aggravated battery. However, prior to the incident, Mitchell showed evidence of racial motive with his speech, therefore increasing his sentence to 4 years. Kenosha County identified his vulgar actions as a hate crime and found him guilty, to which Mitchell appealed his sentence. Mitchell disputed the legitimacy of Wisconsin's penalty enhancement on the grounds of the First and 14th Amendment.
Undeterred by Mitchell's tenacity, the appellate court ruled in favor of Wisconsin, deducing that his racial epithets existed as evidence of motive. As the case progressed upwards, the state Supreme Court found the penalty enhancement to be unconstitutionally overbroad and ruled in favor of Mitchell. Justice William and Justice Shirley asserted dissent, affirming that the people are allowed to free expression, however, not to the extent of imposing violence on another in order to further their beliefs.
Ultimately, the case was selected and settled by the U.S. Supreme Court as they rationalized that physical assault does not qualify as an imaginative expression of the self that is protected by the First Amendment, pronouncing their favor in Wisconsin. This reflects the prevention of intentional conduct, not in suppressing belief or expression. Mitchell's penalty enhancement was kept.
As a result, legislatures regarding hate crimes were adjusted in order to magnify the convictions if a singular entity's objectives were based on race and violated the First Amendment. Furthermore, in court, this precedent helps to protect Asian Americans by better distributing justice through ruling punishment based on the ramifications of the crime, not speech.
When looking back on how hate crimes in general have been dealt with, both in the past and present, it is important to understand the benefits and consequences of these efforts so that we may only learn how to better ourselves in the future.
Yeah, on the topic of how past efforts have harmed our cause today, When looking back on the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, or even on the Japanese internment camps, it is obvious that we were alienated as people from the start.
Much like today, despite the numerous efforts trying to better this issue, there will always be individuals trying to keep alienating and excluding Asian people as a whole. In a way, anti-Asian sentiment has always been a part of America, and it's because of these past events that has manifested into something that is taking more and more lives away today.
On the brighter side, in a way, it is because of these past events that we are able to learn from our mistakes and move on. Today, we are now more aware and are able to recognize this racism to do something about it.
The recent coverage on the Stop AAPI hate movement has led to numerous acts of donations and volunteer work to help combat these acts of violence. Even regular people from TikTok are using their platform to speak on this issue, no matter how small their following.
Along with that, in March 2020, the Stop AAPI Hate Reporting Center was established as a response to protect the Asian community and to prevent these incidents from happening more frequently. It's really a relief that these blatant acts of racism aren't being looked over anymore and are actually being taken care of.
Is there anything else that can be done to see more change?
Yeah, well, considering the rise in hate crimes have been occurring widespread across America, I think it's imperative we address the issue through the U.S. government. It is through the U.S. government that the power of government funding and the enactment of laws on the federal level will create a greater impact to addressing anti-Asian sentiment in America. While Biden has signed a memorandum in the first steps towards government accountability, it is vital to have concrete laws that will represent and protect the AAPI community.
I totally agree. The acts of hate towards our community has only driven us apart. But when we as a society recognize the oppression that has been laid upon the BIPOC community for generations, I believe anything is possible in combating racism.
Along with having government accountability towards our issue, the foundational structure of dual federalism is a system that will work in tandem towards reaching solidarity in our nation.
For the viewers who might not know what dual federalism is, could you elaborate on it, please?
Yes, of course. Dual federalism is a political arrangement in which the powers of the federal and state governments are separate, yet they work in tandem with one another. The reason why I mention this type of system is because the concentration of Asians in America will differ from place to place. For example, the highest concentrations of Asians reside in California and in New York. With that in mind, the states of California and New York are more inclined to address and initiate laws or actions that will support the AAPI community from future hate crimes.
It should also be noted that in September of 2020, 164 Republicans had voted against a bill that condemned anti-Asian sentiment in America. It is clear that on the federal level that the Republican Party didn't see the gravity in the hate crimes facing the AAPI community early on into the pandemic. However, it does not stop us at the state level to address the concerns of the AAPI community when facing higher concentrations of Asians in certain areas that are making up a larger portion of the total instances.
Likewise, we would like to mention that these hate crimes towards the AAPI community aren't the first to initiate federal action to protect one against such hostilities. In the case of Matthew Shepard, who is a gay student, and James Byrd, who is an African American, they were faced with horrendous acts of violence that initiated the Hate Crime Prevention Act of 2009. Both Matthew and James were murdered in 1999, and because of the life lost, it initiated the first statute that allowed federal criminal prosecution of hate crimes motivated by the victim's actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity.
With this in mind, the Hate Crimes Act made it a federal crime to willfully cause bodily injury or attempt to do so using a dangerous weapon on the basis of the victim's actual or perceived race, color, religion, or national origin.
From these facts alone, one may conclude that the actions of hate crimes goes beyond any race, color, religion, or sexual orientation. And for that matter, we as a society need to look past our differences and defeat institutionalized racism.
In conclusion, anti-Asian sentiment begins as a silent enemy, infiltrating our air with every inhale and exhale. It is a disease that cannot be prevented by the usage of masks or fronts.
Its antidote is action. The government's current approach fulfills the bare minimum and fails to execute substantial change.
So what should change? Implementing the effort to dismantle our internal prejudice in order for us to heal our external vessels or the speech we project outwards. Implementing the effort to rebuke the detrimental oblivion of others and to do so with additional passion towards those who assert their derogatory phrases with purpose to harm.
cease the performative actions of the federal government, and provide tangible, accessible health resources for all AAPI affected.
We must consider a comprehensive revision of our previous laws that indicate anti-Asian bias, eradicate this anti-Asian stigma as a whole.
Are we really allowed the pursuit of happiness, the liberty to assert our identities and cultures proudly?
We deserve to live and breathe authentically and not in scattered, fearful breaths.
It is gut-wrenching that we have become desensitized to the numerous accounts of bigotry occurring within our institutions, and the death of our people is not something to be contemplated as normal as our next breath.
We stand in unity as we expel anti-Asian sentiment that is perpetuated by our antiquated institutions and disoriented individuals that have become pawns of said institutions.
The yellow peril shall no longer trudge on the path of white silence. That's all we have for today. Thank you for tuning in into our podcast. Please look forward to our next episode regarding the civil rights, liberties, and civic engagement of the AAPI community. Visit our Instagram page at Asians with Reasons for more updates. Asians with Reasons, signing off.